Hi, all. I just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about um, aquatic pollution in the context of different aquatic ecosystems to show how they can impact these ecosystems and why we should care about that. And I just had a big cup of coffee, so this will be speedy. So, one of the main aquatic ecosystems that gets affected by human pollution, whether it's chemical, biological, or physical pollutants, are wetlands. These include things like swamps, marshes, bogs, and mangroves, and they're any sort of ecosystem that has soil, that has a terrestrial component to it, but they're either periodically or permanently flooded. So the soil is totally saturated, and many of the plants have to live in that water. They can be freshwater or saltwater as well. Mangroves, you may not have heard of. They're predominantly in tropical areas like Florida Everglades and the Keys. They are trees that actually grow in the water. They tend to grow in salty or brackish water, and you can see their roots grow down underneath the water and into the soil. Here's zoom in, kind of a grainy photo, but their roots are actually growing into the soil. And mangrove roots play a really important role in oxygenating the water, providing oxygen for the water. They filter the water both of um, nutrients and particles, but also biological pathogens and things like that. They provide a habitat for young juvenile fish, for many different invertebrates, and they provide some structure that can help buffer waves and storms and such like that. Mangroves are a hugely important ecosystem, both for protecting other ecosystems and also for human benefits as well. All wetlands, however, mangroves particularly, but all wetlands provide a variety of ecological services. They help control floods by decreasing runoff and increasing seepage into the soil instead. They protect us from storms, they purify and filter water, and they act as major carbon sinks. Here's a picture of me in a salt marsh when I was doing research in Georgia in college. Salt marshes are hugely important for protecting us from storms, and all of this grass is high primary productivity that absorbs a lot of carbon. They're also important for protecting from storms. Check out this GIF here showing how a mangrove forest here can help reduce the energy of waves. Let's see, so we've got waves coming in on the left, and you can see as they come into contact with the mangrove trees growing in the water, the waves subside and the energy dissipates. So that way at the shoreline, you don't have any increased waves, you don't have any increased erosion, destruction of habitat, destruction of property or residential communities. So mangroves and other wetlands play a really important role in buffering against the shore. This is going to keep going. Here we go. Come on. They also play an important role in providing habitat and nursery grounds for thousands of species. Many of the waterfowl in the Americas, including geese and ducks, heron, egrets, things like that, require wetlands to lay their eggs and raise their young. Amphibians, fish, lots and lots of plants rely on these wetlands as habitats. So they're really important to protect. Unfortunately, there are a variety of threats facing these wetlands, including coastal development of houses, industry, and also the oil industry, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. This is development in Louisiana. This is right around here is New Orleans, and you can see New Orleans is up here, sorry. You can see the loss of wetlands from 1839 to 1993 due to the development of the oil industry around the Gulf. Building dams can also threaten wetlands. Overfishing can threaten wetlands. But the big one that I want to focus on are pollutants. Right? This is a major watershed that's going to gather all of the pesticides, all of the toxic chemicals from all these farmlands, etc., are all going to end up in the Mississippi and flow down into the Gulf of Mexico. And those can have significant impacts on the coastal wetlands as well as the actual oceanic ecosystems. Another important ecosystem, it's not a wetland, but another really important ecosystem affected by pollutants are coral reefs, and they provide a great case study showing all the different ways that different types of pollutants can impact an ecosystem. First of all, it's important to know that coral reefs are one of the most beautiful and important ecosystems in the world. They are a foundation species. They provide a habitat for a variety of different species and promote biodiversity and growth. And therefore, they're also an important food source. Without the coral reefs, many fish populations would die. Huge for the tourism industry, and they also help again, protect us from storm and erosion, and they can provide medicinal ingredients and components. Something else you need to know about coral reefs is that they have a mutualistic relationship with these things called zooxanthellae. So corals are an animal, they're an invertebrate, and when they die, they leave their calcium skeleton behind. And that structure, living inside that skeleton, are these little microscopic water algae that are called zooxanthellae. And these algae do photosynthesis. And in doing photosynthesis, some of the energy that they create, they share with the coral. Meanwhile, the coral is providing a habitat for the zooxanthellae. So they have a mutualistic relationship. It's a symbiosis. So that's important to know when we talk about coral. And coral is affected by both all types of pollution, physical, biological, and chemical. Let's start with physical threats to coral reef. Fishing, dangerous fishing practices, anchors, the tourism industry, chains, all of these things can damage coral reefs. People just stepping on coral reefs can cause damage to them. But also overfishing and overharvesting of the organisms that help make up coral reefs, as well as people who use dynamite to go fishing, can damage the coral reefs. Those aren't so much physical pollutants as they are physical threats. A physical pollutant would be sedimentation, right? If you remember the microscopic algae that live in the coral, they do photosynthesis. And if there's a lot of sediment in the water and it's difficult for light to get through, it's going to prevent those zooxanthellae from doing photosynthesis, which is going to damage the mutualistic relationship of the coral. Another physical pollutant is the plastic waste. You could consider this to be a chemical pollutant, but over time plastics will degrade, they will break down into microplastics, and those can lodge inside the coral. They can release toxic chemicals. They can even, large pieces of plastic can wrap around corals and damage them as well. Additionally, thermal pollution. As the sea temperature rises, the algae, those zooxanthellae that live inside the coral, will die. It gets too hot. It's outside their range of ecological tolerance. And so the coral loses their symbiotic partner and can no longer get the energy from those algae because the algae are dead. And so the corals die. They turn white because they lose their color. That's why they call it bleaching, coral bleaching. You can see some photos here of bleached coral. And it makes them much more susceptible to disease, to physical damage, and to death. Let's talk about some biological threats to coral reef. There aren't a ton, but there are some pathogens that you can see in this background here that are affecting coral reefs. Invasive predators like some starfish and the lionfish can damage coral reef ecosystems, and there are also pathogens. There was one called the black band disease. It's a bacteria. You can see it affecting corals all around the world. This part of the coral is dead. This is where the disease is spreading down into the live coral, slowly killing it. These are becoming more prevalent as the waters continue to warm. Bacteria like warm water. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about chemical threats to coral reef. Oil spills, pretty self-explanatory. We talked a little bit about how they can smother invertebrates, right? If they're going to smother the coral, it's going to make it difficult for the zooxanthellae to do photosynthesis. It's also going to make it difficult for light to get through and reach the algae, the zooxanthellae that are in the corals. Additionally, nutrient pollution, excess nutrients from runoff from agriculture and golf courses and stuff promote the growth of algae in the water. Now, zooxanthellae inside the coral are a type of algae, but the algae that's just floating out in the water, if that grows really rapidly, it's actually going to block out the sunlight. Look how foggy this water is. And a recent study, very recent study, shows that increased nutrient levels, not only they block out the sunlight, they also make it difficult for coral larvae to survive. So nutrient pollution is a significant chemical pollutant that is harming coral ecosystems. And there are a variety of other toxins. You may not know this, but your sunscreens can be extremely dangerous to corals. They can negatively impact the reproduction and growth rates, and they can damage the symbiotic relationship with the algae. Same with herbicides. They can just straight up kill the algae, and heavy metals as well. Here's a great infographic showing how the sunscreen you apply can affect not only corals, but also other invertebrates like mussels, plants like fish, plants like algae, fish, sea urchins, and dolphins. It can accumulate. It can cause hormonal imbalances. So how can we do that? You can switch to coral-safe sunscreens, and then you can find alternatives, right? Use an umbrella, use a hat, wear a sun shirt, leggings, UV sunglasses, etc., etc. And that's it. But wetlands and coral reefs provide great case studies for understanding how pollutants affect ecosystems. So keep that in mind going forward.